What lessons can medicine learn by listening to those who live it every day? What happens when patients advocate not just for themselves, but for others like them? The stories that shape the future of healthcare are the stories we tell today. This is the Patient Perspectives Podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Patient Perspectives Podcast. My name is Lauren Scholler, and today I'm joined by Camryn Berry, who is a PhD candidate and advocate living with fibrous dysplasia. Camryn has advocated on Capitol Hill for the Ensuring Lasting Smiles Act, serves as a young adult rare representative with the Every Life Foundation, runs a support group for young adults with craniofacial differences, and is a member of the Fibrous Dysplasia McCune-Albright Syndrome Alliance Patient Advisory Council. She researches pain in fibrous dysplasia at Boston Children's Hospital and is passionate about bridging the gap between patient experiences and scientific research. Thanks for coming on, Camryn.
Thanks for having me. This is my podcast debut, so I feel very honored to make a guest appearance. So I'm pretty excited.
I love that. I am so excited about this conversation. And to start, can you share about yourself, anything related to your diagnosis, your experience as a patient, professionally, or your background that would be important for listeners to know?
Yeah, definitely. So I was diagnosed with fibrous dysplasia 20 years ago. The 20th year anniversary for fibrous dysplasia is kind of a big deal because the genetic mutation that causes FD is on chromosome 20. So it's like a big exciting one. I'm also on the Patient Advisory Council for the FDMAS Alliance, and it's also their 20th year anniversary. So I kind of like that we were born together, I guess. But yeah, so I was diagnosed 20 years ago, but kind of the experiences that led up to that start when I was 3. I had a tooth that erupted as normal, like a baby tooth, and that came down, and it went back up again. I have like a very type A mom who kept record of all of our development, me and my brother. And so she had like a detailed baby book about when each tooth came through. And so she was like, I could have sworn that tooth came in. So she went back and checked the baby book, and sure enough, that tooth she had written down that it had come in, but it had disappeared. And so I was taken to the dentist and they did a Panorex, and the Panorex was actually overexposed. So because I was so little, I was 3, they didn't want to give me more radiation. So they didn't repeat the Panorex. So we would have known then, based off of that, if it had been like correctly exposed, that I had fibrous dysplasia in my cheek. But we couldn't see it, but he was like, I'll remove the tooth. It seems to be problematic. So that tooth was removed. And then because of that, my mom kept regularly checking my mouth, of course, to make sure none of my other teeth were just up and disappearing. And so it was right around my 6th birthday when she kind of looked in my mouth to do sort of the regular check of that all my teeth were there. And my whole palate, the whole roof of my mouth, instead of being concave, was convex. Like it was just this huge bump on the roof of my mouth. And so she called up the pediatrician's office. Funnily enough, my brother already had an appointment scheduled for that week because he is allergic to the cold. So he like goes into like anaphylaxis, like had to have an EpiPen and everything in the cold. So it was kind of a rough week for my mom because that was the appointment that he had scheduled to get that figured out and get sort of that rare diagnosis, I'm sure. And so she called up the office and she was like, I'm gonna bring in my daughter as well. She has a large mass on the roof of her mouth. And of course, they were like, what? But she brought me in, and my pediatrician looked in my mouth and he was like, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to find people who do for you. And so in those early stages, the pediatrician really was sort of bringing people on. We were sent to a doctor in Portland, Maine, and he was like, I know exactly what this is. This is a simple dental tumor. I'll remove it and she'll be perfectly fine. And as my parents were leaving his office with me, they were like, this just doesn't feel right. And so they called the pediatrician and asked for a second opinion with someone else. And I was set up with an oral and maxillofacial surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital. And he was fantastic. My surgeon was fantastic. But I had a biopsy a week later. This kind of all moved really fast. I know that so many people with rare diseases have this kind of long diagnostic odyssey, but it moved really quickly for me. I think just because the nature of FD, you can biopsy it. And so I had that first biopsy. The surgeon had made the decision that if it came back, the quick preliminary biopsy, like the frozen section, if it came back as cancerous, they would close me up and send me home so as not to like distribute the cancer cells. It did come back as cancer from that initial biopsy. So I was closed up and recovered. They started kind of prepping me for chemo. Then the final biopsy results came back and it was fibrous dysplasia. And he called my parents and he said, the good news is it's fibrous dysplasia, but the bad news is it's fibrous dysplasia, which is basically like the good news is she doesn't have cancer, but the bad news is that there's not a cure. And so I really continued to have lots and lots of surgeries. That was my course of care for a long time. I had 21 surgical procedures from the time I was 6 until the time I was 13. So it's pretty much every like school vacation I was having surgery, but there really, really was not options for pharmaceutical treatment at that time. I tried a couple of different bisphosphonates and they both didn't stop the lesion from expanding. FD causes these lesions of weak, fragile, scar-like tissue. And so mine happens to be in my maxilla, zygoma, and orbit, so kind of my whole left side, my left cheek. And yeah, that was my course of care really until I turned 13 and we decided that what we were doing wasn't really sustainable long term with all of the surgeries. And so we decided to try denosumab experimentally. So as far as general consensus is basically that I was the first female child put on denosumab. It's a medication that was intended for osteoporosis. And so I went on that and I have had great success with denosumab. It's not as effective in every patient. Every patient with FD is so incredibly different. And but I just happen to be one of the lucky ones who's had such a great response to denosumab. So it really gave me that time to not have surgery and to get involved in advocacy and pursue those avenues.
Your story touches upon so many important aspects that I also experienced in my rare disease journey, and that being how your parents advocated so strongly for a second opinion. And I am really impressed with how your pediatrician took that initiative to seek out resources and understanding for themselves to get you more information because that it sounds like that really changed the trajectory of your care to be able to get you to a more timely and accurate diagnosis. So that's really great to hear that you had that support for both, yourself and for your family navigating that in those early days. I'm sure that was a very difficult time in many regards, but to have that support and know that you have a medical team member who's willing to find those answers when they don't know it themselves is just such a big deal. It makes such a difference. And you mentioned how you now research fibrous dysplasia. So you're in a PhD program and conduct research related to FD. I would love to hear more about your research and your path to researching your own condition.
This story starts like many of my other stories in the hospital. So uh, I was at the National Institutes of Health, and they have a long-running natural history study into FD. So they follow a whole bunch of patients over time, see how the disease progresses. And I got involved with that study when I was 15. And so I was there, and when you're a kid and you grow up with all of these doctor's appointments and stuff, a lot of times they talk to your parents instead of talking to you. It's a lot of like, I feel like I existed in the third person for so many years, where it was more of like my parents would be asked, "How's Camryn feeling?" rather than just asking me directly. So I kind of learned to like disappear in doctor's appointments. But there was a medical student there who was working with the NIH team, and she was like a fellow, and she turned to me and she was like, "Do you want to know the biochemistry behind like denosumab, the treatment that you're on, and how it's working in your body and how it's affecting your FD?" And I was like, "Oh my God, yeah, of course." And so she had, I think, like a PowerPoint that she had prepped for like a scientific conference, and she sat there with me and like went through each of the slides, and my images were like part of the slides. The biopsy with my FD tissue was a part of the slides, and she just like went through it with me and explained it to me at like a level that I could understand at that time. And I just had this like overwhelming sensation of, I have to do this. Like, I have to be involved in this somehow. And so it was really that moment that was so pivotal to me. I was a sophomore in high school, and I decided that I would go to college in something biology related. I started in biomedical engineering. So that's what my bachelor's degree is in. And then I decided that I wanted to switch sort of out of engineering, and I pursued a graduate degree, a PhD in integrative biology. And so now I work at Boston Children's Hospital. I do my research at Boston Children's Hospital, and I am fortunate enough to study pain in fibrous dysplasia, which was always sort of that was always sort of the goal. But the way I got set up with this researcher, it was just all kind of like happenstance and coincidence. I started my PhD program, and my original advisor left the university. He transitioned into a role where he couldn't like bring on grad students to his new university. And so I was kind of left like, I don't know, suspended. And so I did rotations in some different labs, but nothing was quite the fit for me. I really wanted that like trajectory to FD research. And I wasn't going to compromise. And so I reached out to my current PI, who I had actually been a patient volunteer of his on a previous FD study. And I was like, "I know that this is crazy. I know that this is a crazy thing to ask, but like, do you have any room in your lab to bring me on? Would you be interested? Do you like me?" And so he responded, and he was like, "Let's make something to work. I'd love to make something work for you." And so I feel so lucky that all worked out. Like, there's not a day that goes by, there's not a day that's gone by in the last 2 years where I don't like meditate on how lucky I am that this is my reality, and that I was able to like set that into motion. It's so incredibly like all consuming. And like to work in the same city that like I had all of those appointments in like 20 years ago, 15 years ago. There's a lot of like healing my inner child, I think, through this. So I research pain specifically in fibrous dysplasia. And we are kind of pursuing it through all angles. There's not a lot known about pain and FD. I mean, there's not a ton known about FD in general. And so we are looking at the biochemical underpinnings of pain. So I specifically look at proteins in blood plasma in FD patients to try to like quantify pain in some sort of ways too. And we also get to have patient volunteers who are a part of a study where we're having them go through an integrative interdisciplinary pain treatment program. So they receive occupational therapy, physical therapy, and like psychological counseling uh, for 3 weeks. And it's really incredible to get to bring on patients with FD. Like it was only recently, it wasn't so many years ago that I like met someone else with FD for the first time. And so now to be able to like work in an area where I get to see these people all the time and they get to be in my care, that's a great amount of responsibility, but it's also a huge honor. Yeah.
That's amazing. And the piece about how when you were at the NIH and that medical student approached you asking if you wanted to learn more, I work in pediatrics, and so I understand that kind of up to a certain age, most kids don't want to know everything about their care, but especially for me too, around the time that I was in high school, my surgeon started explaining a lot more to me, and I found that to be really empowering. Just to have that information and to take it in, and I was able to go home and research more about it and then use that to inform my decisions going forward. So I think it's really neat that that medical student identified that you might be interested in knowing more than what was being given to you and allowing you to be more of an active participant in your care in that way.
Yeah, I also think it's like so empowering to have it be assumed that you are smart enough to like understand what they're saying to you. Like I think it's easy to feel small around doctors because they're intellectuals, but like that trust that like I at 15 would be able to like understand this biochemistry. I think that was really empowering to me.
Absolutely. So you grew up surrounded by medicine and undergoing numerous surgeries related to your FD. What was it like undergoing surgeries and treatments as a child? Because I think processing these very difficult and often long recoveries as a child is very different than undergoing that as an adult. So I'm interested in knowing how you coped with that and what do you want others to know about the experience of going through major surgery at such a young age?
It's so interesting because now, 20 years later, sorry, my cat must say hi. 20 years later, like, I think I am now reprocessing a lot of those memories through the point of view of my parents. I went through all of this so young, I'm experiencing it in the first person. But now that I'm closer in age to the age that my parents were while I was going through that, I think a lot about how they must have felt and how they must have made those decisions. And I think I owe them so much credit for how normal they made my upbringing feel. Um, I like it truly was my established level of normalcy to have all of these surgeries. Like I almost remember not even really being that scared because my parents like just made it be like, yep, this is what you have going on. Like this is your story and like we're going to take care of you and you have this awesome doctor who's going to take care of you and um, you know, getting to have surgery meant that I got to have chocolate lava cake at the 99 and also that I got to go to the American Girl doll store. So that was a big deal for me. um, and I think that like that would be sort of something that I would want sort of everyone to know. Both people who I tell now who are, maybe able-bodied, a lot of the times when I tell them about my journey, they're like, I'm so sorry. And to me, that always like makes me like start stuttering almost, where I'm like, oh, I don't even think of this as like something sad. Like this is just my reality and my childhood. And like I feel so open to asking questions. Like I would encourage people who haven't gone through it to ask sensitive, of course, questions. um but that's really how I feel about it. Like it just was this quick feeling of readjustment, and it really took me until college, I think, to realize how abnormal that reality was. Um, and that definitely had its own like arc of coming to terms with it. But I think it was really beautiful. I was so in touch with myself because I had to. It was a method of survival being a sick kid. And also I was given a lot of tools both by my parents and a lot of the like they put me in a summer camp. It's called the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp. It's for kids with like life-altering illnesses. And the tools that I learned at that camp to check in with myself and see where I was at and cope and readjust, like these are skills that will come with me my entire life. And that's, I think, why when people say that they feel like sorry for me or like apologize, I'm like, no, I think I'm like better off in the long term. Like, and so I think that would be that's kind of like the main takeaway.
I think about that a lot too because, I went through many surgeries as a child and that was just kind of that was my reality. And, you face what you're dealt with. And my parents did a really great job too, at least in the household. It was, things were still normal and my siblings were around and, we kind of like made the most of it. I did feel like it was more difficult being outside of the house and ha having kind of that experience of how society views, a kid with like mobility devices or casts or things like that. But certainly in the home, the way that my parents made it feel normal and we did what we had to do. Again, kind of like you said, probably some of it was like that survival mode, but I think made a big difference in how I was able to process those experiences as a kid too. I also give so much credit to my parents for having to make these major decisions for me, and I think having kids that are medically complex, it creates a different way of having to grow up and having to face the world, but they really just took it as it came and made something beautiful out of it. And it sounds like I'll put a link down below, but there is a profile done of you by the FDMAS Alliance that depicts beautifully how much of an advocate your parents were, and your mom documented so much of your journey in those early days. I was really impressed with the way that your parents documented your journey for you to be able to look back. So I will leave a link to that because I think everyone should watch that. It was so powerful for me to see, and part of the reason why I wanted you to come on the podcast because of the way that you have faced this diagnosis so strongly from the start.
Thank you. A lot of those clips from that are included in the video of me when I am young are because my parents filmed me going through my first and second surgery so that they could show them to my elementary school class. Obviously, nothing to like create. There's no like intra-op like, video or whatever, but um, because the whole point was this is Camryn's normal, and it also kind of has to be everyone's normal around her too. Because I know my mom said, like, I felt like the more we talked about it out loud together in a classroom with teachers, the less talking would happen behind my back. And that was kind of their way of protecting me, was being as like open and honest as possible with my experiences. And I think that like really lowered my like almost like internalized stigma towards my own illness because it was modeled to me as something that was so normal. Like it really took me getting to college to be like, oh, people like actually have like opinions about like disabled people. Like that was something that was never a part of my environment, but it's because my parents worked so hard to sort of like curate that environment that I was in.
It's funny that you mentioned that because there's an episode coming out probably the next month or so. I was just talking with someone about when I had a surgery, and oftentimes we tried to schedule them for like school vacations so that I wasn't going back to school in the midst of a recovery, but that wasn't always possible. And so the times when I would have surgery and I would be going back with like a full body cast or like an external fixator and these things that are often like very foreign to other kids, and even some of my teachers had never seen some of these devices before, but the school system that I grew up in was just phenomenal at supporting me in that. And before I went back to school, they would share with my classmates some pictures that, my family approved for them to share of me in the hospital and kind of what it would look like for me to go back. And then when I did go back, I remember one year my homeroom teacher let me do a presentation to my class about what it was like to be in the hospital and what it's like to live with this every day. And that created kind of a safe space for students to ask questions and to create more understanding around it. And so I certainly found that as I became more comfortable in doing that, which was probably like middle school and high school, the questions that I got from them they no longer felt harmful. And, I think a lot of times younger kids ask questions out of curiosity and, they don't maybe necessarily know how to ask questions to an individual with a disability. And so I think the questions can come off more hurtful, even if it is well intentioned. But when my school system created more of a space to share my experiences and my story with that, it really changed the way that my classmates felt comfortable in interacting with me and allowing me to feel included at school. So I love that your school did that as well, and that your parents thought to take those videos for that purpose, to turn it into an educational moment for them. So one part of your story as well that I would like to highlight is how you got a second opinion when you were very young, and that really changed the course of your care. And I think that really shows how finding the right surgeon or the right care team is critical. What advice would you give to other patients about identifying providers who respect and include them in their care decisions?
Yeah, I think it's not like a perfect answer and maybe not even like a scientific answer, but I do think that there is some need to like trust your intuition. Like my parents could have been really reassured by that doctor being like, I know exactly what this is. This is a dental tumor. Like that confidence could have been very reassuring to them, but they had no reason to not trust him other than that sense of something just isn't right. And I think that's like a lifelong process of learning to trust that inner voice. Um, but I really do think it's valuable to the process. Like I think it's valuable, the feelings that you get when you are being included. I think there's a lot of like work to be done in clinical care, but also like it's your responsibility ultimately as a patient to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. That's something that I've had to like learn as a young adult. And I think that like it's not a perfect answer because it doesn't feel based in anything tangible, but it's like I don't know. You got to trust it. And that's kind of like your biggest reporter. That's your inner advocate, I guess, is that sense of knowing when something is right and when something is wrong.
It's true. And going off of that, in your experiences as a patient, what does good patient-centered care look like for you? And are there any examples of a time when a provider truly listened and worked with you, or times when maybe you felt dismissed by a medical professional who didn't understand your rare disease?
I've been on and off denosumab for 12 years now. It's got some pretty intense side effects. I was taken off of it when I was 17 because they didn't have the dosing exactly perfect at that time. Like I said, I think I was the first female child put on it. So they didn't really know how little they can give. And it's meant for osteoporosis. So the rest of my skeleton that's unaffected with FD is normal bone. And so it sends you the other way, where it's denosumab is meant to increase your bone density. That's what it's used for in osteoporosis. So if you are sent the other way, you can get osteopetrosis, which is like the density of your bones is so high that you lose your elasticity. So that's why I was taken off of it. They were worried that I was going to break my non-FD bones. Um, and that causes hypercalcemia. So all of the calcium that you've acquired in your other bones to make them dense, like flushes into your bloodstream when you discontinue denosumab. We've learned now that if you give a dose of a bisphosphonate, that can sort of like slow that process and make sure that that doesn't happen. But we didn't know that. We didn't know that, geez, 10 years ago now. So that was my first experience with hypercalcemia, and I had read about it. I knew that it was a possibility. The morning of my SATs, I was vomiting. Hypercalcemia like makes you super nauseous and amongst other things. Um, and I was like, I know exactly what this is. I am hypercalcemic. And so I kind of had that process of like convincing my mom that like I like you have to take me to the doctor. I like need my blood drawn. I like my calcium levels are high. So that backstory is kind of important. For most recently, I was hypercalcemic because I had insurance issues. I had insurance issues that delayed me getting my denosumab dose so long that it basically became an unplanned discontinuation where I didn't get that bisphosphonate to stop that calcium dumping. And so I ended up like just unbelievably sick. And I had had really bad pain at the time. So I assumed until I started like vomiting that it was just because my body was so exhausted from being in pain. But as soon as I threw up, I knew I was like, I have to go get my calcium levels checked. So I go to the University of New Hampshire. I walked into the University of New Hampshire Health and Wellness, and I was like, I know that you have never met me before, to the doctor who was available. I know you have never met me before. My name is Camryn. I have fibrous dysplasia. I've been on this treatment. I haven't been able to get it because of the insurance, and now I'm hypercalcemic. I know I'm hypercalcemic. Can you please just like write a prescription and draw my blood and test my calcium levels? And major props to UNH Health and Wellness, the doctor that I spoke to. They have always worked with me there. I think it's probably because I come in and I'm such like a powerhouse of like, here's me, here's this and this. But he was like, absolutely, like, let me know what else you need. Like, I'll follow up immediately when these results came in. They called me immediately. And of course, that was kind of a medical emergency, but it was just nice that there was no sense of like ego of like, what do you mean you're telling me like what to do and what to test for? It was just, I believe you completely. I will get you what you need, and I'll follow up to make sure that you got care to take care of this. Kind of on the flip side of that, when I went to school, I went in undergrad. My undergrad, I went to WPI. So I was in Worcester, and I like had a pain episode. I had like a pain flare that lasted like 2 weeks. And so I think my body was just like done. It was just over it. And so I got really sick. I couldn't keep down fluids. And so my doctor in Boston was like, Cam, you got to go to the ER. Like if you can't keep down fluids, you have to go to the ER. And so I went, and then the doctor came in the ER, and I gave my spiel that I have learned to give of like, my name is Camryn Berry. I have fibrous dysplasia. Like, here's this, and this. Here's what you need to know about it. Here's what I'm on. Here's what I'm not, whatever. And all of the nurses afterwards, after the doctor left, was like, that was so great. That was so amazing that you like told our, you know, he was probably not that nice. So when the doctor came back in, I was like, had you heard of fibrous dysplasia before? And he was like, no. And I was like, okay, well, see, like this is why I have my spiel ready. I'm not trying to make you feel less than. I'm not trying to make you feel like you're not as smart as I am. This is my life. This is my reality. This is my care. Like, and so like that's that. Like there's no emotion really involved. It's just what needs to happen to make sure that like I'm taken care of.
Both of those stories highlight both ends of the spectrum that us people with rare diseases deal with. I think it can create a source of anxiety sometimes when you're meeting with new doctors because you don't know which one they're going to be. And you go in and you say, I'm Lauren, I have this rare disease. This is what it means for me. And sometimes they're very receptive to that, and other times they're not. As someone with a rare disease, you have to be an advocate for yourself because there are many doctors who have never encountered a patient with this condition. And at the end of the day, those of us with rare diseases know how the condition, we know best how the condition affects us. We might not know everything about the mechanism behind the disease, although you are a very informed patient on that. And, it's okay that we don't know every scientific detail of it, but we know how it affects us. We know what it's like to live with this rare disease. I love your story of at UNH, how that doctor at Health and Wellness really listened to you and valued your insight as a rare disease patient, and that led you to be able to get the appropriate care that you needed at the time. And that leads us into this next topic that I wanted to talk about, which is your work as an advocate. Can you share about your involvement in the Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases and your journey towards advocacy as a patient?
Yeah, definitely. Um, I I run like a support group for young adults with craniofacial differences. I grew up with a pretty large degree of like craniofacial asymmetry. And so I was a big part of like Children's Craniofacial Association. And then I'm also part of Foundation for Faces of Children, which is based in New England. It's actually based out of Boston Children's Hospital. It was started by Dr. Mulliken. And so um, I help run that support group, and Operation Smile, which is an organization for primarily cleft lip and palate. I guess they got wind of our support group, and they got in contact with us about an opportunity to advocate for the Ensuring Lasting Smiles Act, which is an act that would require insurance companies to pay for care relating to any missing or defective body part as a result of a congenital anomaly or birth defect. And so um, I really jumped at the opportunity. I was like, this sounds super interesting. This is something I have never done before. But I kind of went through like 2024 experimenting with just like saying yes to everything and welcoming every new opportunity. So this kind of fell in my lap and I was like, I love it. I'll go for it. Let's do it. And so I went there in July of last year and advocated on Capitol Hill. It was my first time. I was super nervous, which I think is very normal. But it was a great experience of doing it scared. I'm gonna be nervous anyway. Someone should benefit from me doing it. I should like, who am I to prioritize my comfort over what someone else could like benefit from these actions? And so I'll continue to advocate for that in the future. But it's so funny because the Every Life Foundation I had heard about because they have a scholarship opportunity. So I had like signed up to get emails from them, but I hadn't interacted with anything in 2 years. And they send you an email that's like, you haven't interacted with any of our emails in 2 years. Do you still want to receive these emails? And it was like that being called out that I was like, oh, maybe I should like look into this maybe I should get involved. Like, and so I looked at that and I found out about the YAR program, the Young Adult Rare Representatives, and I was like, the requirements to be a YAR, I'm already meeting anyway. Like, I'm already going to Capitol Hill, I'm already advocating. So why not? Let's do it. And so I became a YAR in last year, and I love the organization. I love what they have going on. I love the like endless resources that they have for anyone who wants to become an advocate. Um, and it's I'm going to Rare Disease Week next week, and I'm super super excited about that. So I feel like I'm sort of in the beginning of my journey with advocacy, but I've like really hit the ground running.
Do you think being so involved in advocacy initiatives and groups have helped you to be a better advocate for your own care? And also, how can fellow patients become stronger advocates for themselves?
Hmm. The first part of that question, do I think I have become a better advocate for myself through advocating for others? Absolutely. I think sort of like a virtue of my family, a virtue I was brought up with is like humility and like being humble. And that's not necessarily conducive to being like, I I'm an advocate, like hear me roar and stuff like that. And so I kind of like to joke that I like outsourced my self-empathy. Like it's so much easier to advocate for other people. I see patients at Boston Children's, like they need to be advocated for. They need to be advocated for in the hospital. They need to be advocated for in policy on Capitol Hill, in when fighting for insurance coverage. And if I can be that person to get them easier care, like I will be there and I will do that. And I think now I have something so near and dear to fight for that it, I kind of have these moments. It's like, I gotta be around for a while. Like, I gotta be healthy so that I can, continue to be on Capitol Hill, so I can continue to do my research, so that, other people can enter a world where they don't have to, have the same course of care that I did for those number of years. And so yes, definitely. I think like advocating for others has helped me really learn how to advocate for myself and just to like care about it more. Um, I think patients can become better advocates for themselves by finding something to fight for if that's in your repertoire. It's probably going to be just as scary for you as it was for me, but it's a lot less scarier to do with a friend, and you have plenty of friends in every life in YAR who are waiting to, join hands with you, and find something to fight for and use that as fuel.
Definitely. The resources that we have now for patients with rare diseases, whether it's in the advocacy space or the education and information space, there's so much out there. And if there's not, feel free to build something that you're passionate about to go and help other patients as well. And I think that knowing how many resources there are now compared to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we don't have to go through this alone. And that's a really cool thing. And it's special to know that there are so many people out there and these organizations that are wanting to provide opportunities for advocacy and for people with rare diseases to find a voice for themselves. So opportunity is out there, and absolutely what you said is so true. And I think it is a great message to leave listeners with. So as we get to the end of the episode, where can our listeners find you, Cameron? And is there anything that you're working on now that you want to promote?
Yes, definitely. Okay, if you happen to be listening to this and you have FD or FDMAS, and you're between the ages of 18 and 30 and have pain above a 4, please email me. My email is CamrynDBerry@gmail.com, or better, email my children's email, so Camryn.Berry@childrens.harvard.edu. If you are interested in partaking in a study where you can get occupational therapy, physical therapy, psychological counseling for free for 3 weeks, in Boston, and we can meet and be friends. Uh, I would like to plug that I will have a guest appearance coming up on the 1 in 20 podcast. I know that you did a podcast episode with Jonathan recently,
Hmm.
which I listened to. He's fabulous. So that's on the horizon. I'm on LinkedIn. I gotta be better about using it. That's on my like to-do list. Um, and yeah, I'm on Instagram as well. So, and I'm a little bit more active over there, talking about sort of rare disease, advocacy, rare disease legislation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a joy.